On October 24, 2021, ICD was pleased to host a webinar in its Faith Perspective series entitled Creation Stories and Their Present-Day Implications. The panelists tell the stories of their respective faiths and the valuable lessons that may be drawn from them. ICD Chair Pami Sachdeva opens the program with a brief introduction to interfaith communities for dialogue.
Okay, on the right side of your screen, you will see the 11 organizations which now comprise the membership of ICD. 6 faith groups are represented in our membership. And a representative from each of these 6 faith groups will be presenting tonight. In terms of our mission, we promote inclusiveness, integrity, respect, and trust of all people, and we stand in unity and support of each other. This is who we are and what we do. Now I'll introduce you to Geneva Pope, who is a long-standing member of the ICD board, who will introduce the topic and our panelists. So thank you and welcome again. Geneva, it's yours.
Gather tonight to learn from one another. It is our intent that this will be the first in a series of events featuring various aspects of faith groups represented among our member organizations. Today, we're focusing on creation stories and our understanding of how these stories impact each of us. As you can see, I have just introduced the topic. I will introduce the panelists shortly. They will present for about the next hour or so. Then we'll have breakout sessions, and we will gather back as a whole group very briefly for a conclusion. Before I introduce the panelists, here are a few housekeeping notes. Microphones will be on mute to avoid disruption. Panelists are being recorded so that we can share this presentation with you, with the audience, and with our faith communities. It will be one of many things that we have or will make available to our community for learning opportunities. Any comments or questions submitted through the chat will be seen only by the hosts, who will respond as appropriate in the days following this session. We won't be able to respond to chats during this event because we want to have adequate time for the breakout groups. Each of our panelists is affiliated with one of our member organizations. 5 of them are longtime and active members or clergy of their faith communities. Imam Siddiqi was hired in August of 2020 to his position at Dar al-Hijra. We welcome each of you. It is quite a privilege to be able to learn from such a knowledgeable group. After all of you have been introduced, we will begin with Cynthia, and the panelists will speak in the order in which they are introduced. We have the bio slides. Cynthia Mcdaniel became a Baha'i in 1976, and since then has served on local spiritual assemblies, the governing body of the Baha'i faith, for many years, and worked with the National Spiritual Assemblies Office of Public Affairs. She hosts weekly interfaith devotions, is a member of the Spiritual Assembly of Baha'is of Fairfax County East, Interfaith Communities for Dialogue, and Fairfax County Faith and Equity Committee. Eric Rothberg is a longtime member of Congregation Olam Tikva who enjoys teaching, particularly leading OT's Shabbat dinner study group, attending Shabbat services and participating in OT's community service projects. He represented OT on ICD steering committee, serving as a facilitator often and hosting interfaith dinners. Eric grew up in Alexandria, where he began his interfaith involvement with Alive, a group then of churches and synagogues helping the poor. Pastor Sarah? Reverend Sarah Serslich has been the pastor of Peace Lutheran Church in Alexandria, Virginia since 2012. Prior to becoming a pastor, she served in the Peace Corps in Malawi and worked for the Center for Global Education at Augsburg College, both in Minneapolis and in Namibia. She is a board member and treasurer of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. Chandra Mohan is a practicing Hindu descended from a long line of traditional Hindu priests. While he is not a formally trained scholar, he has been raised in the faith and has attended workshops and discourses all his life. Recently, he renewed immersive learning of Sanskrit, the liturgical language of Hinduism. He is currently the principal coordinator of the Virginia chapter of the organization teaching Sanskrit. He is an ICD board member representing Durga Temple. Imam Farhan Siddiqi is the resident Imam and Director of Religious Affairs at Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center in Falls Church. Imam Siddiqi was born in Ohio, but raised mainly in Connecticut. He graduated from the University of Connecticut and studied in Makkah, earning a master's degree in Hadith from al-Qura University. Randhir Singh Shatwal immigrated to the United States from India in 1984. He is a member of the Sikh Foundation of Virginia and is involved in matters dealing with Sikh youth, interfaith activities, and is a member of world peace organizations. In 2020, he completed certification for the Fairfax County Chaplains Program. Thank you all for participating. And now we will begin with Cynthia.
Okay, this is a look at creation by an individual Baha'i. Baha'is have no clergy, so this is my understanding of the writings about creation, which are quite extensive, and this is only one facet of those writings. We could look at creation physically, where the Big Bang is a fiery explosion of elements, resulting in the expansion of the universe, a consolidation of those elements into gases, water, and earth. But we're not going to do that. We could look at it symbolically, where the sun represents God, the tree of life represents the manifestations of God, that is, his messengers and prophets who bring a religion and who manifest God's attributes to humanity. And it's sometimes used as a representation for their religions as well. The fruits of that tree are sometimes referred to as the teachings of their religion. What we are going to look at is a spiritual interpretation of creation, which for Baha'is is an ongoing and continuing activity. It's generated in response to the developing capacity of humankind to understand God and his plan. Now, the reason for creation, according to Baha'u'llah, is I loved thy creation, hence I created thee. And there are three participants in the process of creation. There's God as the initiating agent, the manifestations of God as the activating agent, or the divine will, or the word of God. There's humanity, who is the recipient of that activation and a respondent to it. So who is God? For Baha'is, he's the unknowable essence. Abdul-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah and the center of his covenant, says, that which we imagine is not the reality of God. He, the unknowable, the unthinkable, is far beyond the highest conception of man. And an example of that might be that a painting cannot know its painter. So who are the manifestations of God? There have always been manifestations of God, and they've been sent to every people, but most are unremembered in the distant past, the time before history. The ones that are remembered are from the last about 6,000 years, and they include Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. And in this example here, we see that God is the sun and that the manifestations are the rays of that sun. And you know, we can't look at the sun directly, and even the manifestation, the rays of the sun are difficult to look at unless you look at them perhaps at an angle. So that's how we see the manifestations. So the relationship of God and his manifestations from a human perspective, Baha'u'llah says that the essence of belief in divine unity consists in regarding him who is the manifestation of God and him who is the invisible, the inaccessible, the unknowable essence as one and the same. The manifestations unite the letters B and E into the word be, the force which creates everything. So Baha'u'llah and all the manifestations of God have some rendition of this verse, be and it is. He also says, every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God is endowed with such potency as can instill new life into every human frame. Each manifestation brings a renewed covenant with God, and that covenant was first stated in the primordial period before time began. And in that covenant, God and his manifestation says, am I not your Lord? And humanity responds, yea, verily. So from a Baha'i perspective, this verse from Krishna is applicable. When righteousness declines, when wickedness is strong, I rise from age to age and take visible shape and move a man with men, succoring the good, thrusting the evil back, and setting virtue on her seat again. Baha'is believe that creation is progressive through God's religions. And this verse is going to be talking about the symbolism of the tree of life again. So Abdul Baha says, the religion of God is one, and it is the educator of humankind. But still, it needs must be made new. When thou dost plant a tree, its height increaseth day by day. It putteth forth blossoms and leaves and luscious fruits. But after a long time, it doth grow old, yielding no fruitage any more. Then doth the husbandman of truth, the manifestations of God, take up the seed from that same tree and plant it in a pure soil. And lo, there standeth the first tree, even as it was before. So we can also look at the nature of humanity, the third participant in creation. What makes us special? Baha'u'llah says man is the supreme talisman. And if you're like me, you're wondering what that means, and you have the need to think about it. The dictionary definition says it's a supernatural figure or object that brings luck or goodwill. Another way to look at it is that it's our soul created in the image of God and containing a force which can manifest all of the attributes of God. Baha'u'llah continues, lack of a proper spiritual education hath, however, deprived him of that which he doeth inherently possess. The great being saith, regard man as a mind rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So how does creation affect the world today? We might look at that as the purpose of religion. And the purpose of religion to educate humanity about God in conformity with our ability and our capacity to understand, which increases as humanity matures. The Baha'is believe that humanity has proceeded through its infancy, its childhood, its adolescence, and is now embarking on its maturity. We feel that it fosters unity and social transformation. So far, the unity of the family, the tribe, the city, and the nation has been achieved. The transformation and unity of the world is being created today, and the struggle of recognizing the oneness of humanity versus the priority of one over another causes the turmoil and chaos that we see today. Society is being reborn. So how is transformation being created? I think that it's through the good deeds and the prayers of souls in every religion who believe in and respond to God's love, resulting in God's mercy being scattered abroad and causing the heart of every righteous man to throb. Though he, that righteous person, may at first remain unaware of its effect, yet the virtue of the grace vouchsafed unto him must needs sooner or later exercise its influence upon his soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much, Geneva. I guess my slides. That's title slide. Next slide. So what I'm going to try to do today is sort of go through what are the key concepts for Judaism that are based on the creation story. I think some of the implications for today's world are going to be, should be pretty apparent. Then I'm going to sort of look at the key verses from the book of Bereshit, that's the Hebrew, which means in the beginning, Genesis chapters, mostly chapters 1, and it's from the Torah, which are the first 5 books of Hebrew and Christian scriptures. And then with the remaining time, how I apply these from today from a more personal perspective. Next slide. So these are the sort of the key concepts. I'd say the Tselem Elohim is probably, I would consider, the most important concept in the creation story. And it's essentially that we, humanity, are all made in God's image, and it's the basis for how we should treat one another. It's the basis for ethical monotheism, that the doctrine that there is one God, and then that God's primary demand on people is that they live ethical lives. Our sages believe that God cares about us and how we act toward one another. So our next concept, very important, and it kind of flows from the first, is Tikkun Olam, which means repair the world. Essentially that we are partners with God in the ongoing creation and repair of the world. Another thing that's raised in the creation story is the concept of Shabbat, the Sabbath, and this is central to Jewish observant weekly Sabbath observance. We are to remember Shabbat and keep it holy. It's the highlight of my week for me, and many have argued, or some have argued, that Shabbat has been critical to Judaism's survival and flourishing. The fourth concept is Shomra Adonai, which stands for Guardians of the Earth, and that we're responsible for its protection and renewal. If you went and searched Shomra Adonai on the internet, the results would bring up lots of Jewish environmental groups and programs to protect the environment. Judaism, in fact, has a special holiday for the celebration of trees, and it's called the New Year for Trees. It's marked by a special meal where you eat different kinds of fruit, and some of the themes are appreciating the beauty of the world, the cycle of the seasons, and our special love for the land of Israel, and often involves planting trees of some sort. And sort of the last concept is that Torah and science are complementary. They both capture the wonder and mystery of creation, but they answer very different questions. The Torah addresses who and why we're here, our purpose in the world. It's not meant to be a history, and it doesn't teach us how creation occurred. And this isn't some modern thing. This comes from one of the greatest commentators, Rashi, that's not the purpose of the Torah. Science addresses how the earth and humanity were created, but can't really speak to humanity's purpose. Next slide. So kind of turning into sort of some of the verses, and I'm going to kind of sort of summarize it. We're looking at chapter 1, basically from verse 1 to 31, runs God basically goes through various days and creating the world. Done with creation, he says it was very good. And the key day is on the 6th day, is when creation of humanity on the 6th day. And this is where the concept of Tselem Elohim, that God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said, be fertile and increase. And this is in Jewish prayer, traditional prayer, when I say my morning prayers, one of the things we thank God for is making us in God's image. The prayer reminds us of our potential to imitate God's ethical qualities. And we learn of God's qualities in God's response to Moses when he asked to know God's ways and behold God's presence. And then quoting from, this is from Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 to 7. God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Next slide, please. And sort of shifting to the beginning of verse chapter 2, my understanding, the pastor is going to address mostly chapter 2. So this is kind of a nice, we're not going to overlap here. And it says, the heaven and the earth were finished. And I have that underlined for a reason. I'll come back to it. On the 7th day, God finished the work he had been doing, and he ceased on the 7th day from all the work which that he'd done. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. And the reference to finished, the rabbis of the Talmud, which is sort of the compilation of commentary on the written Torah, the oral Torah, and basically captures the arguments and discussions among the rabbis about, there are a lot of gaps in understanding, and tries to fill the gaps. And the rabbis of the Talmud deduce from God ceasing to create, so he stops creating, that God left the world a bit incomplete, so that we might become God's partners in the work of continuing creation and the perfection of the world. Regarding Shabbat, which sort of the rest of the verse, it's a very special for Jews. We're essentially taking a break from the demands of career achievement and stresses of the work week, and it's a weekly sanctuary in time to enjoy the company of who we love, our families, gather with the Jewish community, and draw closer to God. It teaches us how to celebrate living and how to dedicate our lives to making the weekday world a more compassionate and humane place. For me personally, in my observance, it's the highlight of my week. Starting Friday night, we have a special dinner with the family. No one's in a rush. People have time to talk to each other. It's just very relaxing. Kind of gets off to a nice start. this week to synagogue. It was a gorgeous day, and I spent the time with the congregation Tikva. We participated in prayer. Learned one of the things I really like with a conservative synagogue, and this would also be true of an Orthodox synagogue, is no electronic devices in use in the synagogue. So people actually have to talk to one another and not stare at their phone. So I love that. So it's kind of like a throwback to another time. Moving to the next verse, this is sort of the basis for the Shamra Adamai in terms of guardians of the earth. That God, this is after the second creation story. God took man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till and tend to it. And this is sort of basically, from this we get our responsible for protecting the environment. It's part of our responsibilities. Next slide. Oh, actually, there is no next slide. Now I'm going to kind of turn, I guess, sort of more to the kind of the personal application. Going back to what I started at the beginning, the three concepts of Selam Elohim, that we are all made in God's image, Tikkun Olam, that we are partners, humanity are partners with God in repairing the world. And I think these two concepts are a critical part of repairing the world is our daily interactions with our family, friends, co-workers, and strangers. Obviously, we care about, I'm not saying it, we care about helping the poor, protecting the environment. That's central to Judaism. But I think repairing the world, that's in some ways that can seem so overwhelming. How can I, an individual, have an impact? And so I think part of repairing the world is how we interact with one another, how we interact with family, friends, co-workers, and strangers. And we strive daily to imitate God's qualities and treat those around us with compassion and respect. Once again, we have that daily, for me, that daily reminder in our morning prayers that this is what we can strive for. Obviously, we're not God, but we can strive for the qualities that God represents. And I think one thing, clear implication for today is if we really view others as made in God's image, that should be the basis for civilized discourse with those we disagree with. I think it's particularly relevant with politics. Republicans and Democrats, you can disagree. That doesn't mean the other side is evil, that they're that demonizing them. I think too much in our current dialogue. Basically, Republicans think the Democrats are evil, and the Democrats think the Republicans are evil, and they have no interaction with one another and try to point to the worst aspects of each other. So I think kind of we're desperately in need of a little remembering of making in God's image. One of my favorite quotes from the Talmud is, "Who is wise? One who learns from all people." So even the people you disagree with, even your enemies, you can learn from them if you're willing to listen. And the important word is listen. One way that I kind of put it into practice in Judaism, I think has a lot of great guidance, is on ethical speech and avoiding lashon hara, which is evil speech. It rejects the widely held perception that speech is harmless and there's nothing wrong with spreading negative information as long as it's true. Granted, today we've gone beyond that. We're spreading information that's not true or whatever, but even if it's true, that doesn't mean it's okay to spread it. And recognizing the destructive healing power of words. And it provides tools for elevating our daily interactions with those around us. And just as some of the basic concepts of emphasizing the need to give others the benefit of the doubt, focusing on others' positive qualities rather than their negative ones. And when you do rebuke them, you should do it only if it serves a constructive purpose and a last resort. Obviously, there's situations where you're required to speak out in terms of certainly abuse and things like that. But just as a general concept, are you criticizing someone to make yourself look good, or is there a real constructive purpose to it? And I guess sort of, I wanted to flag this book here. It's called, it's by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. It's for Olpi. He's a rabbi, Jewish. It's Words That Hurt and Words That Heal: How to Choose Words Wisely and Well. This book was transformative to me, and I think several years ago I led a book discussion in ICD. So I strongly recommend this book. It's very readable, and it's for a general audience, even though it's written by a rabbi. So that I'm sort of done with me.
Eric. Pastor Sarah.
Yes, hi everybody. Can you see and hear me okay? Yes, okay. If you can't at any point, I have a weird internet connection, but I'll do my best. I am so glad to be with you all. I do not have slides, so you just get to hear me talk. A big thanks to all of you who pulled this panel together and to the other panelists. And thanks to Eric Rothberg. He and I did chat before because our traditions share creation stories, or share a lot of creation stories. And so we wanted to make sure we weren't doubling up. Before I begin, I want to highlight just one piece of my biography that is really important where this group is concerned, which is that I sit on the board of something called the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, which is an interfaith group working in Northern Virginia on local solutions to climate change. If you are at all interested in that work, find a way to reach out to me. We'd love to hear more people, get more people involved with that. Anyway, I'm here to present a Christian view, not the Christian view, because Christianity has a lot of viewpoints, but this is the one that I represent. Christianity and Judaism share a bulk of scripture. That Christianity has two parts to our scriptures, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And the Hebrew Bible is where we share scripture with Judaism. So we too have that same creation story that Eric highlighted in Genesis 1. And what I want you to remember are the words, in the beginning was the Word. That's how our scriptures start, in the beginning. And God speaks. This is what happens in the beginning. And then that line that Eric said, it is finished. There's a second creation story in the second chapter of Genesis. They're very different from one another. This blows people's minds. There's not just one creation story. In the second creation story, humanity is created first. And then the human one is placed in the Garden of Eden. And then the other animals are created in order to have a friend for the human one. And the human one's job, description from God, is to till and to keep the garden. And for a while, there was a real misinterpretation of this, that people thought it meant that we should just like do whatever we want with the garden. But we've really reclaimed that sense that we are responsible in some ways for the garden's well-being. Eventually, the animals that were created, the human one had a relationship with them by naming them, but none of them was found to be an adequate partner. And so another human was formed. And so we get this human pairing. And then we get this paradigmatic story of the fall, the transgression of Eve, of the female of the human one. And what she does is she reaches out in the Garden of Eden and she eats from the tree that God told them not to eat from. And when she does this, sin is introduced into the picture, and they become very ashamed and they try to hide from God, and God sends them out of the garden. This is really important for most Christian traditions, this idea of sin as transgressing God's boundaries. And what's important to me from a creation perspective is that the first commands given to humans are about their relationship with the rest of the earth. And the way that sin enters the picture is literally a sin against a tree. And that what is taken from the tree is a fruit, and the fruit is the symbol of the future of that tree. And so that from the very beginning of our creation story, where we have sin enter in, we have a devastation against a piece of God's creation that has to do with its future. Rereading that now in these times, my mind is always blown, like, wow, this stuff has been here from the very beginning. So I'm going to fast forward to a couple of other creation stories in Christianity. And the first one I want to fast forward to is the Gospel of John. So we add on to scripture from Judaism, and we have the New Testament. And the New Testament has a bunch of books in it, but the first 4 of them are called the Gospels. And what they do is talk about Jesus's life. Jesus is our main guy. And Jesus is what makes Christianity Christianity. So we have these 4 Gospels that recount Jesus's life. And one of them is the Gospel of John. And the Gospel of John, I think, is also a creation story. So the Gospel of John starts like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life. That has a real echo with that Genesis 1 story that Eric talked about. And for Christians, we believe that that Word was present in the very beginning of creation. And then John goes on to say, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and that's Jesus. So that God's divine Word, which was a creative Word, becomes human in Jesus, and no longer are other humans kind of the ones responsible for bridging divinity and humanity. God takes that on, takes on human nature and human flesh. And so the Gospel of John puts together fleshiness and divinity over and over again, and brings together what the Greeks talked about as body and soul, a kind of separation and a dualism. The Gospel of John really pulls these things together. And throughout this gospel, we see this affirmation of life and affirmation of the world. Jesus dies. This is the big moment in Christianity. Jesus dies, he's buried, and then he's raised again. And in the Gospel of John, he is raised again into a garden. And the most faithful disciple is a woman named Mary Magdalene, and she sees him in the garden and she's crying, and he asks her why she's crying, and she doesn't recognize him, and she thinks that he's a gardener. I love this, that when God is resurrected into the world, people think that God's like a gardener. Isn't that great? So she reaches out to him, and he says to her, "Don't touch me." And she listens to him. And one of the ways to interpret that in light of that first story is that she has now learned her lesson. Humanity has now learned a lesson about not reaching out for the divine, but being content to be human. And that where sin enters in, and the sin of pride and greed and selfishness, they all have to do with this kind of wanting to be more than we should be. I'm going to wrap up here because I know there's a lot of other great speakers, but I just want to point out that Christianity has a real problem in it, that there's a thread of Christianity that is really earth denying, that I think isn't faithful to our scriptures. For anybody who wants to know, they kind of say the earth is passing away and we'll get to go to heaven and who cares. Over and over again in our scriptures, we see that creation is really important to God, so much so that God came to earth. We pray on earth as it is in heaven. And the final just creation moment that I want to highlight from our scripture comes from our final book of the Bible, which is Revelation, which is the kind of final vision when humanity is really restored with God. And what Revelation says is that the home of God is among the mortals. And the angel shows me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. And through the middle of the street is this river, and on either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit. Remember, fruit being the symbol for the future. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. A quote to end us from my religious tradition, which is Lutheranism. Uh-oh, did I lose you? No, from my religious tradition, which is Lutheranism. Our guy Martin Luther, who lived about 500 years ago, was asked what would he do if he knew the world was going to end tomorrow, and he said, "I would plant an apple tree today." And thus ends my presentation. Thank you all.
Hi, namaste everyone, and welcome to the event. Can you all hear me all right? All right. So welcome to our program here. So unlike some of my co-panelists, I'm not a traditionally trained scholar here, but I am in the faith, so I'm here to share some of what I believe are the creation stories and might be important for you all, interesting for you all to hear as well. But also, unlike some of my panelists, except for Cynthia, maybe I'm also kind of an insider as far as ICD goes. And so I work with Geneva and Judith and others, in fact, in putting this together. So many thanks to some of the other panelists and presenters today. Before I go further, I thought it would be interesting to know who are the Hindus, as a matter of fact. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, because I was getting some notification here. All right, I just want to take a quick pulse check on what is a Hindu and who is a Hindu. There's some confusion about this. Now, first of all, this word Hindu, Hinduism, etc., is not indigenous to the faith. There is no such word in any of our scriptures. Hindu was a geographic term at first, and it was the word chosen by the Persians to describe some folks who lived by the river that they called Hind River. The name was really Sindhu, but they called it Hind, and the people around it were Hindus. And then later on, that turned into the Indus River, and the land near it became Indium and India and all that. And Hinduism is of a more recent coinage. It was just about 200 years ago by British civil servant. So just for administrative convenience, all the people, which is their definition, that were not Christians or, as they put it, Mohammedans, they were considered to belong to a certain religion called Hinduism, and that's the word they chose. And here we are. So the question is there a replacement word? There are folks that have used the word dharma or dharmic, which are good words, but there's not a real full descriptor, or there was not even a need indigenous in the scriptures, but Hinduism is still acceptable. So this is a very, very ancient tradition, conservatively dated at least 6,000 years from today, back from today. And the focus of that was not necessarily to establish a religion. The notion of religion itself was novel. So it was more an approach to reality. And there were, as you can imagine, in all those millennia, there were multiple approaches to reality. But there was a certain common unity in certain core beliefs. And one of them was there's one omnipresent consciousness, not polytheistic as, sometimes mistakenly understood. It's, you are allowed to worship that one consciousness in various forms. Human form, mostly, male, female, is very fervently worshipped in, as you may have seen, in different parts in that area, and it's a large area, and they all evolved independently as to the kind of the nature of worship itself. But the other one important distinguishing feature is of Hinduism is the belief in the circle of time as opposed to an arrow of time. So that's the hence there is the belief in reincarnation. We call it Atma, slightly different from soul. The Atma separates from the human body, and then it comes back and takes hold of another new life being formed, etc. And part of that is also the notion of karma, which some of us have familiarity with, and it's loosely translated what goes around comes around, which kind of is okay, but there's more to it. But then you have to exhaust all your karma before you don't reincarnate, that kind of stuff, before you merge into the overall consciousness. That's the entire belief. And the lights are born divine. There is no sin, and they are born divine because it is that overall omnipresent consciousness that permeates itself or himself in every living and non-living organism on the universe. So it is inherently divine, and that word itself is known as, it's a Sanskrit word, Vishnu. One of the gods you may have heard of, many different gods in Hinduism. Vishnu literally means one that permeates itself, as opposed to Shiva, the one which is auspicious, which is there is one that eventually is actually an image, as the Christian speakers put it, image of God. Here we say it's the same as God. So every other human being eventually is the same consciousness. That's why we start with saying Namaste. I bow to the divinity in you. So when you say, you can think of Shiva as an inside-out belief, whereas Vishnu is an outside-in belief. It's both kind of the same thing. And because of the diversity in the faith itself, in the way the reality is even understood, there are actually many different schools of philosophy, as they say. There are at least 6 major that are still being studied. But there's also equally different number of creation stories, as you can imagine. So we'll look at a couple of them maybe. So one is the very famous called Purusha Sukta. It's in our Vedas, which are the oldest scriptures that are known at this point, and they are, I think, dated somewhere around 4000 BCE. And in one of these stories, there is Vishnu, as I mentioned, pervades all organisms, and he's described as having 1,000 heads, poetically, and he envelops the entire universe by just growing in all dimensions. And it is very poetically described. I put some words out there which are all in Sanskrit language, and there is a pretty dramatic account of the creation. It says there is someone called Virata Purusha who emerges out of this cosmic being, and then that Virata Purusha is sacrificed in the fire by the demigods, and then from the fire emerge all these animals and the birds and the different categories of men. And then you start to wonder, we're talking about the origin. And when you're talking about the origin, someone is sacrificing somebody, but where is the someone? Where did that person come from? Where is the origin here? So that goes back to the belief in the circle of time. It's not really one unified point of origin. It is at any cycle of universe, there is an origin and an end, and then the whole thing starts all over again. And in the same Purusha Sukta, it also ends with this verse in the bottom that I have, the last bullet, Samno astu dvipade sam chatushpate. It literally means, may there be prosperity and auspicious to the 2-legged ones and also the 4-legged ones, chatushpate. So it's all about human beings and also animals is in all living organisms is what that represents. And then there is another kind of a similar sounding creation story in the Vedas as well, and that's called Hiranyagarbha Sukta. And so after the universe gets there is a dissolution, comes to an end, one cycle of it, that is, and it's all dark, there's nothing going on, and then there is a self-manifestation of the first universal consciousness, and then establishes a golden womb, and it's called Hiranyagarbha. And the God manifests itself as Vishnu, again the same, and then encompasses everything, all things. And then out of his navel emerges this God of creation for that particular universe, sitting in a lotus. And that's interesting because these navel, lotus, and those metaphors are shared in other cultures as well, including Christianity and I think Judaism as well, and many, many other cultures. So lotus is this notion of purity and rebirth, etc. And navel is the point of origin as a metaphor in many other cultures as well. So it's interesting. The same thing is being represented in the very ancient Veda scriptures as well. And this is just for that one cycle of universe, and then it ends, and then all over again, the Brahma is he's reborn, and then he starts presiding over the creation of the next cycle of birth and death. So, and then I said there are about 6 different schools of philosophy and so forth. So one of them is yoga, and it is, you know, somewhat well known here in the United States and the Western world. And it's, of course, it's understood in a very limited capacity as you know, physical well-being, which is part of it, but it is the greater notion of it being it is you take the route of physical understanding and control to understand the divinity sitting within yourself. And so there is an interesting story that's based on those yoga, and there's another one, Samkhya, theories of evolution. And he said there was Shiva, he was in an ecstatic condition. This is just, you know, a larger principle being reduced to a story for easier consumption. That's what all these stories are about in every faith, I'm supposing. And so there's Shiva, that's a male god, and he was in an ecstatic condition. And then there's this female goddess, Parvati was drawn to him, and then they get married, etc. And then she says, I want to experience the state of bliss that you were in. And he says, okay, the only way we can do it is that you have to merge with me, and then they merge together. And obviously that means that the Samkhya theory explains it rather explicitly. It says Purusha and Prakriti is defined as more simplified as matter and energy, which is great resonance with the modern physics today. So that's how the universe, the Big Bang, is supposed to have originated. There was matter, and then there's energy that got together, and then eventually all life forms emerged out of it. And that's what the Samkhya theory also says applies to both the individual and the cosmos. So going, and then the Vedas also say, cautions that the understanding of God in any accuracy is itself, God is unknowable to some degree. So cautions, so who knows for certain? There's a lot of open questions there. How can you even know when it was born, when came creation, etc. So it is there in you know, in the Rig Veda, one of the mandalas. So it's interesting they kind of got that covered. And then I'll finally stop with some comments from outside commentators as well. So there was a famous Arab writer, Al-Biruni, who said they hold the eternity of Creator to be determinable, not measurable, since it's infinite. And then Carl Sagan, he said the cosmos, according to Hindus, cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite number of deaths and rebirths. So essentially what they're both saying, and that's what Hindus basically believe in is that everything is basically a remix. We know that that's a famous blog, and that's why I put that within quotes there. So there isn't really a whole lot to be invented. It is all remaining to be discovered, and you discovered God's creation, the universe of creation, and then you discover yourself. So that's all I have. So I'll just stop here. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you. Imam Siddiqi is next.
Thank you, Geneva. I don't have a slide, like unfortunately, like the previous presenters. So Just so we don't take too much time, when it comes to creation in Islam, there are two major creation stories that I think are fundamentally important. That is the creation of the universe and everything that's around us, and then specifically the creation of Adam and Eve. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on the Adam and Eve discussion, and even in that, I just want to focus on one section in particular. And the reason for that is because a lot of these stories, there are a number of elements to them, and there are a lot of things that we can definitely focus on. But the point of this was to take away practical benefit for everyone in these individual stories or in these individual sections. So the one thing that I did want to talk about, and the one thing that I did feel was really important, was how God calls Adam his successor. And that's how he's described as in Surah Al-Baqarah, or which is the second chapter of the Quran, where God said, he tells the angels like, hey, I'm going to send the successor down on the earth. And the angels, they respond, well, why would you send somebody down who's just going to cause mischief and cause bloodshed, etc.? So God, he says, I know what you don't know. And this is one of the first elements that we hear concerning the angels and their interactions. Because what's interesting is that later in these series of verses, God actually says to them, he said, I knew what you were hiding and I know what is apparent. So you have two groups of people here, or you have two, I would say, two agents who are dealing now with this creation of Adam. And this is the thing that I want to focus on, and I don't want to go too much beyond this. But you have the jealousy that seems to be relatively apparent or inherent with the angels, which is something pretty surprising. And you have Iblis, or you have the devil. So how the devil deals with his jealousy is that he disbelieves in God, right? God tells everyone to bow down to Adam, to show his superiority, to show that he is the best of creation. And Satan, he refuses. He says, I'm not going to bow down to him. I am better than Adam. The angels, what happens with them is that they're actually shown that Adam has been created and Adam is superior to them because of the knowledge that he's been given and this ability to, this creativity, this inherent creativity that he's actually been given. So how to deal with jealousy is something that we all face daily. And this is a major problem and a major issue that we all have. How do we deal with that jealousy? I think this is a wonderful portion of the story to definitely focus on, to help give us insight on how to deal with that in our own personal lives. There are many times and there are many issues that we all face, and we do get those pangs of jealousy. But we should learn to recognize our own abilities. We should learn to recognize others' abilities, and we should learn to appreciate those things, because all of these things have come from God's command. And I thought that was a great message, because the reality is what is the other path? The other path is the path of arrogance. It's the path of pride, and it's a path of just self-consumption. And this is what has happened, Satan, and who we call Satan the accursed. And the reason for that is because he is just constantly in this state of pride. He's in the state of self-consumption. He's in the state of negativity, and we're always striving against that. And I thought this was just a wonderful benefit that I could share with all of you. And again, there are many parts and there are many segments to all of the different parts of the creation story, whether it be the creation of everything around us or, the creation of Adam. But hopefully we can get to those another time, because I don't want to take too much time here, and I don't want to tire everyone out.
Thank you.
No problem. It was my pleasure.
Dear.
Maybe I can start here. I've taken a little different title here. I'm going to talk about Sikh wisdom on creations and creator, because the creation stories are so many, and they are not complete until we speak something about the creator also. Sikh religion is the youngest, I think, in the world now. And it is only 552 years back, our first Guru Nanak, was born. And then he had his teachings, but he never declared himself that he is starting a new religion. To some extent, this is a way of life. And what he preached is the life which we should be practicing. But again, the basic question comes, after all, who is the creator of everything which we see around us? The entire universe has got only one creator, whom we can say God, we can say Ram, Allah, Rahim, anything, but he is the only one creator, and he has created the entire universe, and it dwells invisibly in his creations only. So question comes here, if there is one God, then what would happen if there are some other gods somewhere in other religions, etc.? The answer is there would have been a total chaos. If in a small country on this planet, not let's say small country like US, cannot deal with two parties here, and we are saying that the government is going to shut down because we don't agree, how we can imagine the two gods would always agree and they'll agree to the creation. One wants to create, the other doesn't want to create, and the result is no creations will be there. So, whereas our Guru Nanak said that there is only one God and he created, and the thing which he said that he took the dust and he gazed on that one and created the world, the universe, and the sky, the earth, the trees, and the water. So God, the verse is there in red color, which is in Gurmukhi, which says that the day, night, the lunar cycle, days of the week, air, water, fire, nether regions. In this environment, he created the earth and has made the place in the humans to play their roles for which they took the birth. So God also created the human beings. That's what the science also says, that 14 billion, 13.8 billion years back, there was a big bang and then the life started. There was a dust only, there was nothing here. No earth was there. And then all these planets started forming. And that's how it took us nearly 13.7 or 13.8 billion years to create the whole universe. And that's not the end. So that means that God created only one universe or one earth like that. The answer is no. The correct answer is that the God not created one, but he created lots of them. As of today, we do not know how many galaxies are there, how many suns are there, and how many earths are there, how many skies are there. He created, and there is no end to it. That's what Guru Nanak said. He said that if one speaks of them, there is no limit and no end that how many galaxies and planets and solar systems are there. If one speaks of them, there is no limit, no end. So then question comes, why God created all this? The answer is only he knows himself. Because we do not know how many are there, how can we say that why he created so many? And then how he created, as I was just pointing it out, that the verse says that God infused his light onto the dust, which is something which the Big Bang says came out of this, which was just gases, and created the world, the universe, the sky, the earth, the trees, and the water. If we see the cosmic calendar, imagining that the Big Bang took place on the January 1st midnight, and today is December 31st, the human beings came on the earth not more than 1 day earlier on that cosmic calendar. So that means the rest of the time, he was preparing the earth for us to stay there because he had to create the day, night, lunar, sun, moon, and that would have not been possible had he not created those things. And also Guru Nanak has a philosophy that where the God, question is where the God himself dwells. The answer is he is not visible. How is his question is how is creating everything in this universe? He lives in his own creation. Whatever he has created, he lives in that one. It is a limitation of the human condition that the spirit, which is God, and matter, which we see his creations around us, appear in duality. And as a matter of fact, there is a unity and not, which is not very self-evident to us. Now comes that he has created those things, and the life came up after he had created the earth, the water, and the sun. Now, question comes, if those are the basic elements on which our life is dependent, can we afford to play with that, or can we afford to destroy them, which are the guardians of earth environment and which are essential for our sustainment? The answer is certainly no. There are two reasons. One, the God has created everything and he's dwelling within itself. So whatever trees, whatever sea or other things we see, God is living in that one. And this is out of our greed. If we try to destroy that, that means we are going to destroy ourselves. So the real disciple of the God is the one who tries to protect the nature and then keeps the environment healthy for all of us. So what we call is nature is basically nothing. It's a God's place of residing or dwelling, and by his creative power, the winds, water, fire, earth, and dust exist. Everything is in his power, or the Almighty's power, and our nature is the purest in the pure form, which he created. So if God has created and he is managing it, are not we responsible to maintain it? Can we really destroy it? The answer is sure, you can go ahead and destroy, but the end will be, because they are the sustaining elements, will be destroyed ourselves. Now, question comes that why we should be doing this? Definitely one is, of course, sustainment. Secondly, if we have to live in this world, we want to live happily and peaceful. And that comes only when there's a peace within ourselves. And that peace comes when our environment is pure, and then we can breathe into this. We can create multi-story buildings, but there is no pure air around this. How long we can sustain survival? So that's a big question. So the same thing is being repeated here. We cannot have peace within ourselves until unless, I think I'm 2-3 slides behind. Please move forward. Yeah, that's right. So we can get the peace only when surrounding us there is a peace. We'll have the peace within ourselves. And our Sikh gurus reveal that we must create an environment which is full of compassion, love, harmony, and sharing. That's the one which will protect our environment, that will give us the sustainment to live on this earth. Now I'm quickly going to cover a few initiatives which our social leaders have taken, because the God is only one. And he has given in the scripture to us, and we are following those scriptures and trying to interpret what the Guru Bani or the message is there in that one. The first one is that initiative which we have taken is that awareness of, we celebrate the day, 14th of March as a Earth Day, which is which has started almost 8-9 years back. So what we do on that is we create the programs for awareness to protect our forest and forest plantations. We do distribute organic langar. What organic langar means that instead of using those chemicals and fertilizers, which are harmful to earth and also to over the food which we are going to consume, we distribute the organic manure which they use. And we also pledge to use no plastic. That means create the environment as far as possible, reusable or biodegradable. Also, we do this installation of solar power plants and nature walk programs. I'm going to touch a little bit of them in the next slide. Next, please. Yeah, so the tree plantation program, 550th birthday of Guru Nanak was on November 2019. That day we planted all over the globe over 1 million trees to create the greenery. Next, please. And trees, our gurudwaras are the place of our worship are called gurudwaras. And there are 90 historic gurudwaras. And within 1 acre area of that one, we planted innumerable new trees there. Next, please. Then also, of course, I covered a little earlier also, a free distribution of organic manure, discourage the use of chemicals, etc. And this is something new which is coming up these days. Our most historic and first place which we call is the Golden Temple in India, Amritsar. That uses almost 1 megawatt of energy every electricity. So we are putting up the solar panels everywhere so that we are self-sufficient and generate our own renewable energy rather than using fossil fuel or electricity generated from the fossil fuel. Next one, please. Of course, as I said that nowadays they have banned the plastics from the Golden Temple area. They can use paper and the cloth bags only for the visitors. Now, question comes here, what before I say thank you, how the God is getting all these things done. So I'm just going to share a small 1-minute story with you. One time there was a radio jockey, he was listening a radio while, radio jockey was announcing, and then he gets a call from somebody, hey, I want to make a message or give a message to God. And can you please broadcast it? The radio jockey said, what this guy is saying, nonsense. How can I relay his message to the God? But he says, message is very important. I'm starving from last couple of days. There is nothing in the home to eat. If you announce it to tell the God to send me the food immediately, at least for 1 week or 2 weeks, I can survive and my family can survive. Radio jockey said, okay, I'll try to do this one. And he took the commercial break. In that he thought, hey, who knows it, if I say somebody might help this guy. So he announced that I got a call a minute back, which said that message was for God, please send me the food immediately within 1 week. And this is my number, please, this is my address, send it there. And there was a rich man, he was driving his very expensive car and he heard it. He was atheist. He said, still these fools live on this earth. They think God is there and he is going to give them something. He reached his office. Then that message was really coming to his head. He said, I am an atheist and let me tell him that there is no such thing as God. So he asked the secretary, can you fill up one big wagon of food and go and deliver at this address? But remember, tell that person that God has not sent, but Satan has sent all this food for him. So the secretary follows these instructions. She takes that wagon and goes to the person's house, knocks at the door, and she says, hey, there's a food for you and somebody has sent. She said, thank you, I know that it will come. And she delivers the food there. And at the end, she asks, don't you want to know that who has sent this? And the lady replied, I know, God can get his work done through Satan even. So moral of the story is, God has created all of us, whether we believe on him or not, but he directs us to help other people in this on this earth so they can survive. He loves us all. And the only way we can do justice to all this, what he has blessed, is that we share love, peace, harmony with the other persons who share this environment with us. Thank you.
Thank you. All of you are amazing teachers. We're grateful to the time and the effort that you have put into preparing your presentations. You've given us much to reflect on and to dialogue about. Before we go into our breakout groups, there's for hopefully 20 minutes. I hope you'll stay on for a little longer so that we have 20 minutes. Here are some general guidelines. Active listening slide. We ask you to keep in mind some ground rules for active listening and engagement during the breakout groups: open-mindedness, acceptance, curiosity, discovery, sincerity, so that everyone has a chance to speak. Process slide. The breakout groups have been pre-assigned. Each group has a designated facilitator. We ask that you keep introductions brief to allow for more time. You share your experiences and ideas. And lastly, watch for a feedback survey, which will be coming via email tomorrow. Your response will be greatly appreciated. Questions? These are the questions that you will be considering in your breakout groups. What is something new you have learned from the panel presentations? How does your religion inform your understanding of how we should care for people and all other living creatures as well as the earth? And it's unlikely that we will have time for the third question. How have you or your faith community taken action in accordance with the perspective in the second question? That question will be on your feedback survey, so you will have an opportunity to answer that even if you don't in your breakout groups. And now we will go to our breakout groups. Each opportunity we have to learn about the faith of others teaches us we have more in common than we might expect. Right. We celebrate these commonalities and while embracing the differences of our own faith. We are so grateful to the gracious panelists and facilitators, to all who helped develop this webinar, and to each of you for attending. Thank you all again, and good night.
To view other workshop videos in this series, click on the playlist button below. To subscribe to our channel and receive notifications of new videos, click on the subscribe button below.